Today I'm going to show you how to look over your snowblower to make sure it's ready for the snow. So winter's just around the corner, and the last thing you want is to be stuck in a snowstorm with a broken snowblower. So let's look it over and get it ready for the winter. First thing you're going to want to do after taking it out of storage is just look it over. See if there's any damage. Does everything look normal? Next, we're going to look at the engine. If you drain the gasoline prior to storing it, that's good. That will give you a better chance of not needing any carburetor work. However, if you didn't, you may need a new carburetor. So we're going to open the gas cap and look in the fuel tank there. We can see the fuel looks a bit yellow, a bit stale, so that's going to have to all be drained out. Chances are this is going to need a carburetor because it looks like it's sat since last season. So if your snowblower needs a carburetor replacement, it's actually not too hard to do, and I'll have a video coming out on this exact snowblower of how to change the carburetor on these Tecumseh flathead engines. Once your carburetor and fuel system is good to go, pull the spark plug out and take a look in the cylinder bore. It's a good idea to put a little bit of oil in there and rotate the engine over a few times, because if the engine was dry for so long, you want to make sure it has good lubrication. Then it might be a good time to go ahead and put a new spark plug in it. This specific engine uses a RJ19LM Champion. Then go take a look at your oil. If it looks dark like this one does, it's time to change it. On this particular unit, you have a drain plug right there, and then you just tip the snowblower back, drain out the oil, put on some PTFE paste or maybe tape, and reinstall the drain plug, refill it up with some 5W30 oil, and you're good to go. Now after that, your engine should be in good condition and ready for service. So next, we're going to go to the belts. You're going to want to pull this cover off and inspect your belts. Make sure that they are in good condition, no severe cracks, because under the stress and load of a heavy snowfall, that's when they tend to break. So you have one bolt over there, you have one right here. Just pull that off and inspect your belt. Now the best way to find wear and cracks is right where it has a bend on that side. So right there would be a good place to look for cracks. This belt doesn't look too bad. That's for our drive. And then you're going to want to look at your auger belts. You can see these have some cracks, but they're probably still fine for a while. You can also check your pulleys. Make sure they spin freely. And then we'll take a look at the friction wheel and disc down there. So to do that, best thing to do is put a plastic bag right over here. Put on the gas cap to keep gas from spilling out of the tank. And then tilt your snowblower up onto the auger housing there. And then go ahead and pull the belly pan here. It's going to be 6 3/8 bolts on this particular model. And from there you have a good look at your friction wheel and friction disc. You're going to want to be looking for any missing rubber in the friction wheel there. You can turn the wheel slowly and inspect it like that. And you're also going to want to be looking for pitting or any severe damage on the drive disc. In this case, both of these look good. Now while you're in here, it's a good time to move on to lubrication. So you want to take some grease and put it right on here, this hex shaft. You don't want to do too much because you don't want grease getting on the friction assembly there. That is how the unit drives. So any lubrication on the friction wheel or disc will cause the wheels to slip. Then you could also put a little bit on this gear so that it's lubed up where it rides against the hex shaft there. And that's pretty much it down here. So then you can reinstall the belly pan, put in the 6 3/8 bolts, and we'll move on to lubrication for the rest of the snowblower. Okay, now for the rest of the snowblower, lubrication wise, you're going to want to take some silicone spray or some other lubricant like that and just spray down pivot points and just make sure everything's not binding at all. Now you also want to keep in mind your auger worm gear here. This is often overlooked lubrication wise. You can see there's a plug here. You want to pull off that plug like with the screwdriver. Try not to do it when it's really cold or it might break. And then look inside here and see if there's grease. You want plenty of grease in here to lube out these gears. Now some of them take oil, so you're just gonna have to look at your owner's manual for your particular unit. Now you're here also to look at your shear pins. Some models have 2, some have 4, some have even more than that. But you want to make sure your shear pins are in good condition. And one thing to note here, you never want to use normal bolts for this. You have to have shear pins. That takes the load when you hit something hard and saves your worm gear here. If the gears in here are destroyed, your snowblower is likely total because the cost to repair this gear assembly is more than the snowblower is usually worth. So make sure your shear pins are good to go. Your worm gear is lubed up well. All the other pivot points, engine, hex shaft, and then obviously, like I said, check everything, belts, friction wheel, make sure everything's good to go. Now after that, you're going to want to go ahead and start it up. Try starting it with both the pull cord and the electric starter if your unit has one. You want to make sure they are both working. So start it and run it, make sure it runs well, doesn't surge or hunt at all. Engage the drive and the auger. Make sure there's no weird noises. If there's a loud noise when you engage the auger, you could have bad bearings in there. Also, if your pulley here has wobble, lots of wobble on it, that could be a sign of a bad bearing. And another thing to check here, when you release your auger engagement lever there, you want to make sure your augers stop turning pretty quickly. You don't want them to keep turning and turning. That means your belt's partially engaged and you don't want that. You want it to come to a complete stop relatively fast. Now after all that, it's a good idea to check your cable tension. You want your cables to engage pretty soon after you begin pushing the lever so that you get your full travel. You don't want a loose cable that doesn't engage till way down here, because then you won't put as much tension on the belt as it's supposed to have. So if your cables need adjustment, you can see on this particular snowblower there's an adjuster right up there on each side, and there is usually a specification in your owner's manual, like for this auger belt here, of how much deflection it should have. Check your tire pressures, make sure they are at the specified PSI. And also check your skid shoes here. You want to make sure they aren't too worn, and you also want to make sure they are also set at the correct height. You don't want your scraper bar scraping on the ground. Usually you want it between 1/4 and 1/2 inch off the ground, depending on if your driveway is asphalt or cement or if it's gravel and has loose objects that could get caught in the augers. So that's just a few tips there to make sure your snowblower is ready to go. Thanks for watching.